Human invites freezing alien woman into his tent to warm up. What happened next surprised him. The wind cut across the ice like a silent knife, and the sky above the frozen moon shimmered in pale shades of blue and silver. Ilias Cade pulled his hood tighter, feeling the chill seep even through the thick thermal layers of his suit. He had always thought he knew what cold was, but this place had a way of teaching even experienced explorers that there was a difference between freezing and frozen. Every breath came out in short, visible puffs that disappeared instantly into the thin air. The sensors he carried vibrated softly against his chest, warning of sudden shifts in the environment. But the readings that made him freeze, not from temperature but from surprise, were not the ones he expected. It started as a faint anomaly, a small patch of ice that was dropping faster than the surrounding landscape. Ilias frowned, crouching to examine the readings more closely. At first, he thought it was a sensor glitch. His suit's instruments were calibrated for extreme cold, and they rarely failed, but this was something unusual. The temperature in that small area was dropping far more quickly than it should. It wasn't a storm, and it wasn't mechanical failure. Ilias felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. Something alive was there. He scanned the area with his binoculars, and his breath caught. At the far edge of the icy plateau, a figure moved slowly, hunched against the wind. At first glance, it looked like a humanoid creature. But the shape was wrong, tall, and slender, with skin that shimmered faintly in the icy light, almost like liquid metal. Her limbs were too long, and her gait had a fluidity that made it clear she was not human. She stumbled slightly, caught in the gusts, and Ilias' heart thumped. She was clearly struggling, and the readings showed she was dangerously cold. If he didn't act quickly, she wouldn't survive the night. Without thinking about protocol, Ilias activated his suit's communicator. "Unidentified life form detected," he muttered to base, knowing they were too far for an immediate response. The winds carried his words only slightly, but he didn't care. Every second counted. Pulling a small sled behind him, he began to make his way across the ice toward the figure. With each step, he cursed himself silently for underestimating the conditions. The ice shifted underfoot, and the wind fought him as though it wanted to push him back. Still, he moved faster than he thought possible, driven by an urgency that was more than professional duty. It was human instinct. When he reached her, he had to slow down to keep from startling her. She was curled slightly, her arms wrapped around herself in a protective gesture. The skin that shimmered in the pale light was even more delicate up close, almost translucent in some places. Her eyes, large and reflective like twin pools of liquid silver, opened slowly. Ilias felt a strange sense of recognition, as if despite the alien features, there was a common thread of awareness and fear he could understand. She looked at him with something like hesitation, and then pain. The temperature readings from her body spiked alarmingly. She was on the edge of hypothermia for her species. I don't think you should be out here," Ilias said gently, careful not to move too fast. His voice sounded strange against the roaring wind. She tilted her head, trying to communicate, but it was clear she didn't speak any human language. Her gestures were minimal, cautious, almost polite, and her movements betrayed weakness. Ilias realized that whatever her species was, survival in this cold required more than instinct. It required help. And humans could offer that. He opened the flap of his sled compartment, revealing the portable heating unit he used for long field surveys. "Come on," he said softly. "You can't stay out here, it's too cold." She hesitated, then made a small motion toward him as if to trust him. Ilias carefully helped her to her feet, feeling the fragility in her frame. Even through her protective outer layers, her body seemed almost ethereal, a creature built for water and warmth, not ice and frost. He guided her toward his tent, using his body to shield her from the worst of the wind. Every step was a battle against the elements, and yet he felt a sense of calm settle over him. There was a strange beauty in the moment, the quiet understanding between two species, one instinctively protective, the other silently grateful. Inside the tent, the temperature immediately began to rise. Ilias worked quickly, setting up the heating panels and activating the portable thermal blankets. The alien woman shivered, not from fear, but from the sudden relief of warmth. Ilias watched closely, noting every response. Her skin seemed to shimmer more vividly as the heat reached her core, almost like ice melting into water. Her breathing grew steadier, and for the first time she relaxed her posture. Ilias felt a mixture of awe and curiosity. This was not just survival, it was a revelation. He had no idea what species she belonged to, but her biology responded to human technology in ways he had never anticipated. She watched him with wide, curious eyes, tilting her head as she seemed to examine the equipment and the tent itself. Elias realized she was intelligent, far more than any wild animal. Her gestures were deliberate, as if she were trying to understand what he was doing. He gestured to the thermal controls, pointing to the rising numbers on the display. She mimicked him, touching the interface gently, her fingers leaving faint traces of condensation. Elias felt a thrill of recognition. She was learning. Learning how humans managed warmth, how they controlled survival against harsh environments, and absorbing knowledge as quickly as he could provide it. Minutes passed, and the wind outside roared against the tent, but inside a fragile bubble of safety existed. Elias gave her water from a small, heated container, and she drank it with careful sips, almost reverently. Every small action, every gesture, every look felt significant. He spoke softly, describing what he was doing, even though she didn't understand his words. The tone, the rhythm, the care in his voice seemed enough. It reminded him that communication was more than language. It was empathy, patience, and presence. He had always believed humans had an edge in problem-solving, but now he saw it in a new light. It was not force, nor technology alone, but the simple choice to act with care that made the difference. After a while, she settled into a more comfortable position on the thermal blankets, her body finally responding fully to the heat. Elias allowed himself to relax slightly, observing the subtle reactions, the way her skin shimmered, the way her breathing smoothed out, the way her eyes flicked with curiosity at every object. He wondered what her people might think if they saw this. To the Thrasari, if that was her species, humans were nothing more than primitive explorers, yet here was proof that simple ingenuity could surpass centuries of adaptation. One small tent, a few heated panels, and the instinct to care had bridged an entire species' vulnerability. Hours passed, and Elias continued to monitor her, documenting everything he could. Every flicker of expression, every gesture, every physiological reaction was recorded with meticulous care. Yet, even as he worked, he felt a growing sense of anticipation. Something was happening inside her, something unexpected. The warmth was not just restoring her, it seemed to awaken dormant capabilities. She shifted, her hands moving in delicate patterns, almost like tracing invisible circuits in the air. Elias' mind raced. Could her species have untapped abilities that only manifested in controlled conditions? Could simple warmth trigger advanced cognition in a being adapted to entirely different ecosystems? He paused, watching her closely, and felt a thrill he could not name. This was more than survival. This was discovery, a chance to witness the unknown bridging the gap between worlds. She looked at him, her large eyes reflecting the soft glow of the tent, and he thought he saw recognition, not just of him, but of the moment itself, the shared understanding of life preserved through care and ingenuity. For the first time, Elias felt the true weight of exploration, not mapping coordinates or collecting samples, but witnessing a connection that could shape how species might coexist in the universe. The night deepened, but the wind outside seemed distant now, irrelevant compared to the warmth and light inside the tent. Elias knew the moment would pass, that her body would eventually stabilize, and that she might leave or be taken by her own people. Yet he felt an unfamiliar hope. What he had done, what he had chosen to do without hesitation, had consequences he could not fully predict. And that was the thrill of being human, the courage to act, the creativity to solve, and the empathy to care when no one else might. As the hours wore on, Elias finally allowed himself to lean back and breathe. The alien woman slept, her form relaxed, responding fully to warmth and care. Outside, the ice moon stretched endlessly, a barren landscape of frozen silence. But inside, a small bubble of life and possibility thrived. Elias knew that tomorrow would bring questions, discoveries, and perhaps even answers that no human had yet imagined. For now, he simply watched, waiting, and marveled at the quiet miracle that had begun with nothing more than a choice to invite someone inside and share warmth. The next morning, the pale light of the ice moon crept through the thin fabric of Elias' tent. He stirred gently, careful not to wake the alien woman, though she was already moving, her long, delicate limbs stretching in ways that seemed almost liquid. She opened her large, silver eyes and tilted her head toward him, watching him with quiet intensity. Elias felt an odd mixture of awe and curiosity. Despite her vulnerability yesterday, she now moved with a grace that seemed impossible in the harsh environment outside. Her body had adapted quickly to the warmth, and the transformation was fascinating. He wondered what other surprises she held. He decided to speak softly, hoping to communicate in some way beyond language. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm, measured, careful. He gestured to the small heater panels that maintained a steady temperature inside the tent. "This should keep you comfortable for as long as you need." She tilted her head again, then slowly raised a hand and traced a finger along one of the glowing panels. Elias noticed that her touch didn't just explore, it seemed to analyze. Her eyes flicked between the glowing numbers on the display and the panel itself. She was learning, and not just learning by imitation. She was understanding the system, the way it worked, how it responded to heat and control. Elias felt a thrill he could not name. This was more than survival. This was discovery. He had never seen an alien species interact with human technology in such an intuitive way. Most of the research he had read described first contact as cautious, slow, and filled with fear. Yet here she was, adapting with curiosity and a quiet intelligence that made him realize that assumptions about other species often underestimated them. She looked at him again, as if inviting him to continue, and he nodded. "I want to show you something," he said, moving toward a small control console. "It's a device humans use to create heat and comfort even in places like this." He activated a simulation, showing the rise and fall of temperature across different zones inside the tent. Numbers moved, graphs shifted, and colored lights glowed softly. She watched with intense focus, leaning closer as if trying to absorb every detail. Then, unexpectedly, she reached out and touched one of the controls. The numbers changed. Elias froze for a moment, then realized she had understood how to adjust the heat. Her eyes met his, wide and almost triumphant. Elias felt a sudden warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the heaters. She began experimenting, moving from panel to panel, adjusting, observing, and responding. Her body responded faster than expected, showing subtle changes in posture, breathing, and even skin shimmer. Elias quickly realized that warmth was not merely preserving her, it was activating dormant processes in her body and mind. She was learning in a way humans often struggled to teach each other. He had heard of species with extreme intelligence, but witnessing it firsthand was unlike anything he had imagined. The tent, the heat, the human environment, they were a laboratory for something remarkable, something that went beyond biology. Hours passed as Elias observed her, documenting every response. Her curiosity seemed limitless. She touched the insulated walls, feeling their texture. She examined the small storage compartments and even mimicked the way he used the thermal blankets. Every motion, every small gesture, was a lesson and a discovery. Elias realized that what he had thought was a simple act of rescue had become a shared experiment. He had opened the door to understanding her species in a way that textbooks never could. And she in turn was teaching him about adaptation, resilience, and the surprising potential hidden in life forms shaped by entirely different environments. At one point, she paused and made a series of gestures, delicate and precise. Elias watched, unsure what she meant. Then slowly, he realized she was attempting to communicate a question. How does this warmth create stability for humans? How does it allow you to survive when the world outside is deadly? He gestured to her, explaining with his hands as best he could, showing the relationship between heat, energy, and survival. She observed closely, then nodded slightly, as if understanding not only the concept but also the principle behind it. Elias felt a spark of exhilaration. He was teaching and learning at the same time, crossing a barrier that neither species had fully understood. As the day progressed, Elias found himself reflecting on human innovation. He realized that humans had always faced extremes: heat, cold, storms, and isolation. Unlike many other species he had studied, humans adapted by creating microenvironments. Shelters, clothes, controlled fire, and now technology, these were not just tools, they were expressions of human ingenuity. And here was proof that such ingenuity could bridge worlds. The alien woman, Celine, had never known such an environment. Yet within hours, she was not only surviving but thriving, showing signs of adaptation and insight that amazed Elias. By midday, Elias decided to take a small risk. He adjusted the tent's environment to mimic conditions slightly beyond the alien's natural comfort zone, not dangerous, but challenging enough to observe how she would respond. Her reaction was subtle at first. Her body shifted, her skin shimmered differently, and her breathing changed slightly. Then she began experimenting with her own movements, finding balance, adjusting, and learning to manage the new conditions. Elias noted everything meticulously. He felt a sense of pride, not in himself but in the human approach, giving tools, creating opportunity, and trusting intelligence to rise to the challenge. As she explored, Elias tried another experiment. He introduced a small sample of heated water, allowing her to interact with it. She touched it cautiously, then gradually immersed her hands, marveling at the warmth, the difference in viscosity, the sensation. He watched closely as she adapted, her movements becoming smoother, more deliberate. There was no fear, no panic, only curiosity, learning, and observation. Elias realized that this simple interaction demonstrated a fundamental principle. Intelligence across species might manifest differently, but the ability to understand and adapt was universal. By late afternoon, the wind outside had picked up again, but inside the tent, a fragile harmony persisted. Elias felt a quiet satisfaction. The alien was thriving, and he had learned more about her species in a single day than any survey mission could have recorded. He wondered what her people would think if they could see this. Humans, often underestimated for their fragility, had created a survival system that was elegant in its simplicity. One small tent, a few panels, and an instinct to care had turned a near-death situation into a lesson in adaptation. Seelan began to experiment with the tent's interior further. She moved objects, arranged them differently, and observed how the heat flowed. Elias realized she was not only learning to survive, but also understanding human design principles. She was analyzing, experimenting, and optimizing, a scientist in her own right. Her body responded as she explored, showing subtle signs of enhanced awareness. Elias felt a thrill of realization. This was no ordinary encounter. Human innovation was giving her species tools and insight they had never experienced before, and it all began with something as simple as warmth and shelter. As the evening approached, Elias decided to document the day in a more structured way. He took notes, sketches, and recordings of her interactions, creating a detailed log. He knew that these observations would be invaluable, not just for understanding her species, but for understanding the ways humans could influence survival and adaptation beyond their own kind. He also understood that the true value of this encounter was not in the data. It was in the shared experience, the connection between two intelligent beings from entirely different worlds. Each small gesture, each moment of understanding, was a bridge between species. Finally, as the artificial night fell inside the tent, Elias allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He watched Seelan settle into a comfortable position on the thermal blankets, her body relaxed and responding fully to the warmth. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting not just gratitude but curiosity, intelligence, and perhaps even wonder. Elias smiled softly. He had acted instinctively, choosing to help a stranger in need, but the result had far exceeded survival. It had become discovery, learning, and understanding. He realized with quiet awe that sometimes the smallest acts, the choice to provide warmth, to offer shelter, to observe carefully, could have consequences far greater than anyone could predict. Outside, the ice moon stretched endlessly, a barren, frozen expanse. Yet inside, a small bubble of life thrived. Elias knew that this was only the beginning. She would learn more, adapt more, and perhaps even teach him things he could never imagine. But for now, the tent was filled with a quiet energy, the warmth of survival, the spark of curiosity, and the promise of discovery. Elias felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing that humanity's simple acts of ingenuity and care could create ripples far beyond what anyone expected. And as he watched her, he understood the true meaning of exploration. It was not just mapping new worlds, but connecting with life, understanding it, and finding the unexpected in the simplest choices. The next morning, Elias woke to find the tent filled with soft light from the rising sun. The ice outside glowed pale blue, but inside it felt warm, almost cozy. Seelan had been awake for some time, moving carefully among the equipment and exploring everything she could reach. She seemed less fragile now, her body adjusted to the heat, her movements confident yet still fluid and elegant. Elias watched silently, fascinated by how quickly she had adapted. There was intelligence in every gesture, precision in every motion, as if she were learning not only how to survive, but how the humans thought and lived. He decided to try something new. He gathered several small devices used to measure heat, airflow, and energy transfer. He arranged them on a small table and activated each one, showing the readings as they changed in real time. Seelan's eyes widened as she followed each graph and number. Then she reached out, pointing at one of the devices. Elias nodded and adjusted the settings, allowing her to control it herself. She experimented carefully, observing the results, then adjusted again. Each time her body seemed to react, her skin shimmered slightly, her breathing became more steady, her hands moved with purpose. Elias realized she was not just learning how the devices worked. She was understanding principles that took human engineers years to master. He leaned closer. "You understand faster than I expected," he said quietly. Seelan's eyes met his, and for a moment there was a flicker of recognition, almost as if she was acknowledging that humans' way of solving problems was deliberate but adaptable. She tilted her head and made a series of soft, precise gestures. Elias tried to interpret them, guessing that she wanted to know why humans created these tools in the first place. He smiled slightly and began explaining with gestures, using his hands to show cause and effect. Heat, survival, control of the environment, safety. She observed carefully, then repeated the gestures back to him, clearly attempting to mimic his explanation in her own way. The more she learned, the more Elias realized something extraordinary. The heat and shelter were not simply keeping her alive. They were unlocking cognitive abilities that had lain dormant. Her species must have evolved in stable, controlled environments, and when exposed to new conditions, her mind was capable of rapid adaptation. He had seen examples of learning in animals and humans, but this was unlike anything he had encountered. Here was intelligence in its purest form, applied instinctively to unfamiliar technology. And she was teaching him just as much as he was teaching her, revealing insights into her species, evolution, and how differently life could survive across the universe. By mid-morning, Elias had an idea. He carefully introduced a small challenge, a miniature climate simulation that mimicked sudden environmental changes, though not dangerous ones. Seelan observed closely, then tentatively interacted with the system, adjusting parameters to stabilize the environment. Her hands moved quickly, confidently, as if intuitively knowing the right settings. Elias watched in astonishment. She had not just learned the basics of human engineering. She had begun to apply critical thinking, experimentation, and optimization. It was a rare sight, alien intelligence adapting human technology to its own logic. "This is remarkable," Elias murmured, jotting notes in his log. "I never imagined she could learn this fast." He looked at her, and for the first time he felt something more than curiosity. He felt the weight of responsibility. If this encounter reached her people, it could change their perception of humans entirely. He remembered the emergency protocols. First contact should be cautious, careful, distant. But here, that distance had been unnecessary. Humanity's strength was not in weapons or power. It was in ingenuity, observation, and the instinct to help. And she was proof of that. Seelan paused, studying a small airflow sensor that controlled the tent's ventilation. She made a gesture that seemed like a question. "Why does this matter to humans? Why do you care about controlling heat this way?" Elias smiled softly. He could not give a complete answer in words, but he showed her, demonstrating that maintaining balance in the environment allowed humans to survive, to thrive, to work and explore even in extreme conditions. Her eyes flickered with understanding, and she repeated the demonstration herself, adjusting airflow to achieve the same results. Elias realized she was beginning to understand not only how the devices worked, but why humans valued them. As the day progressed, he allowed her to experiment further, introducing simple mechanical puzzles and energy distribution challenges. She responded eagerly, exploring multiple solutions, analyzing results, and repeating the process with methodical precision. Elias watched, fascinated, and began to see patterns. Her species, while biologically different, shared a fundamental intelligence with humans, problem-solving, learning, and curiosity. But the way she approached these challenges was entirely unique. She did not rush, she did not panic. Every decision was deliberate, every movement thoughtful. Her intelligence was patient, precise, and adaptive, a reminder that life in the universe took countless forms, each brilliant in its own way. By late afternoon, Elias decided to observe a different kind of interaction. He introduced a small experiment involving temperature zones within the tent. Some areas were warmer, others slightly cooler, creating gradients that humans rarely needed to manage directly. Celine moved among them, testing, adjusting, and noting the subtle differences in how her body responded. Elias recorded everything carefully. He noticed something remarkable. She was learning to use the gradients to optimize her comfort and efficiency. This was advanced cognitive behavior, the kind humans only mastered with years of experience. Yet she had done it in hours. The realization filled him with awe. "I think she's learning how we think," he said quietly to himself. "Not just what we do, but why." He felt the significance of the moment. This small ice moon, this simple tent, and the act of offering warmth had become a bridge between worlds. Humans often underestimated the importance of ingenuity, but here it was undeniable. The choice to act, the ability to create solutions for survival, had produced not only life-saving results but profound intellectual exchange. Celine's rapid adaptation proved that intelligence could recognize and adopt methods from entirely foreign species, and that humanity's approach had value far beyond its own kind. As evening approached, Elias allowed himself to reflect. Celine had begun exploring the materials in the tent with renewed interest, arranging and rearranging objects, testing surfaces, and observing how heat moved through them. He realized that this behavior mirrored human experimentation. She was learning by doing, testing hypotheses, observing outcomes, and adjusting her approach. Her species, accustomed to more stable environments, had not needed such adaptability before, but now she was thriving in it. The simple act of providing warmth had transformed into a shared intellectual journey, a lesson in collaboration, curiosity, and the power of observation. Elias also began to understand something about humanity itself. Humans had survived extreme climates, colonized barren lands, and explored distant planets not because they were the strongest, but because they adapted. They observed, experimented, failed, and tried again. They shared knowledge, learned from each other, and used creativity to solve problems no other species could. And now, in this small tent on this frozen world, he was witnessing the result of that approach in a species utterly alien to his own. It was proof that human ingenuity, quiet, persistent, and inventive, could influence life far beyond Earth. As night fell, Elias watched Celine settle among the heated blankets, her body relaxed and her breathing steady. She had spent the day experimenting, learning, and absorbing knowledge at an astonishing pace. Her eyes, reflective and intelligent, met his briefly, and he felt an unspoken understanding pass between them. He realized that what had begun as an act of compassion, offering warmth to a freezing alien, had become something far greater. A meeting of minds, a bridge between species, and a lesson in the quiet power of human adaptability. Outside, the ice moon was silent, the wind howling across endless plains of frozen terrain. But inside, a bubble of life and learning persisted. Elias felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The alien had adapted, learned, and grown in ways he had never anticipated. And he had learned, too, about her species, about intelligence, and about the unexpected reach of human problem-solving. It was a reminder that exploration was not just about collecting data or mapping worlds. It was about understanding, connecting, and discovering possibilities that lay hidden in the simplest choices. As he prepared for sleep, Elias made one final observation. Celine had begun creating her own patterns of interaction, rearranging tools and objects in ways he had not demonstrated. It was as if she were inventing new methods, blending her understanding with the knowledge he had shared. The implications were staggering. If her people could adopt even a fraction of what she had learned, it could change the course of their society. Humans, often underestimated for their fragility, had shown that creativity, empathy, and careful observation were powerful tools in any environment. And he had been the one to demonstrate it. Elias felt a quiet pride, tempered with humility. He had acted instinctively, choosing to help someone in need, but the results had far exceeded survival. He realized that the small acts humans often took for granted, the decision to share warmth, to offer shelter, to observe and teach, could resonate across species and worlds. And as he drifted into sleep, he felt a profound sense of purpose. To continue exploring, to continue learning, and to continue showing that the human way, the way of curiosity, creativity, and compassion, was a force that could shape the universe in ways few could imagine. For Seelen, the day had been transformative. She had learned more about human life, problem-solving, and ingenuity than she could have imagined. She understood now that warmth was not just a physical necessity, but a gateway to survival, cognition, and growth. And as she rested, she processed everything she had experienced, her mind quietly weaving the lessons into patterns that could be shared with her people. The encounter had begun as an act of survival, but it was becoming something far greater, a first contact not marked by fear or conflict, but by learning, understanding, and mutual respect. And in that small tent on a distant frozen moon, two species, one human, one alien, discovered something extraordinary. They discovered that survival could be a shared endeavor, that intelligence could cross worlds, and that the simplest acts of care could have consequences no one could foresee. And for Elias, the realization was profound. Sometimes, humanity's greatest strength was not strength at all. It was the courage to act, the creativity to solve problems, and the empathy to share what worked, even with someone entirely different. The following morning, the pale sun crept slowly over the frozen horizon, casting long, soft shadows across the ice moon. Inside the tent, Elias stirred awake, careful not to disturb Seelen. She had already risen, her movements fluid and purposeful. She studied the tent with a quiet intensity, inspecting each device and surface as if trying to understand the human mind itself. Elias felt a sense of wonder. Yesterday had shown him how quickly she could adapt, but today she seemed to be observing with intent beyond survival. It was as if she were not just learning to survive. She was beginning to understand human philosophy, the way humans approached problems, and the logic behind their inventions. He stretched and looked around, noting how she moved with confidence. The way she interacted with the heating panels, airflow devices, and environmental sensors was precise, deliberate, almost scientific. Elias realized she was thinking critically, analyzing outcomes, and applying them immediately. Every small adjustment she made in the tent reflected intelligence, not just instinct. She had learned to survive, yes, but now she was optimizing her environment, experimenting with it, and improving it in ways he had not demonstrated. He could see the spark of innovation in her eyes, the spark that had allowed humans to thrive in extreme worlds for centuries. Elias decided to take the next step. He opened a small case and removed a few additional devices, basic tools for measuring temperature, pressure, and energy distribution. He laid them out on the table, showing her how each worked, then stepped back to observe. Seelen approached them cautiously at first, then began experimenting. Her hands moved with elegance and precision as she adjusted settings and watched the results. Elias noticed how her body seemed to respond differently than a human's. Small gestures, subtle shifts in posture, and the way her skin shimmered indicated not just comprehension, but engagement at a cognitive level he could barely describe. She was thinking, reasoning, and planning her next move as if she were creating an experiment of her own. He spoke softly, trying to communicate the concepts. "Humans create these tools to control our environment," he said, gesturing to the devices. "We use them to survive, to explore, and to make life possible in places we could not otherwise live." Seelen watched intently, her eyes reflecting not just understanding but curiosity. Then in a slow, deliberate motion, she mimicked his gestures, adding subtle variations of her own. Elias felt a thrill of excitement. She was not merely copying, she was experimenting, blending her logic with his demonstration. This was an entirely new form of learning, a merging of alien intelligence with human ingenuity. By mid-morning, Elias introduced a more complex exercise. He created a scenario where the tent's temperature zones shifted unpredictably, simulating the challenges of exploration missions. Seelen moved through the tent, adjusting controls, testing airflow, and stabilizing temperatures. She paused occasionally to observe, then returned to make new adjustments. Each action was deliberate, analytical, and adaptive. Elias documented everything carefully. He realized that the alien mind was not limited to immediate survival instincts. She was capable of strategic thinking, optimization, and rapid learning, abilities that could revolutionize how her species approached extreme environments. As the hours passed, Elias noticed a subtle change. Seelan's gestures became more confident, her movements more intentional, and her curiosity more pronounced. She began exploring patterns, rearranging devices, and testing combinations that he had not suggested. It was as if she were developing her own understanding of human technology and applying it creatively. Elias marveled at the speed and depth of her learning. In a single day, she had gone from dependent on warmth for survival to manipulating complex systems with understanding and purpose. It was proof that intelligence could flourish under the right conditions, regardless of biology. Elias decided to challenge her further. He introduced a small simulation of environmental change that required her to balance multiple factors simultaneously: heat, airflow, and energy distribution. Seelan approached the task methodically, her large eyes scanning each device, analyzing interactions, and making adjustments with precise timing. Elias felt a sense of pride, not in himself but in humanity. The ability to create solutions, to design tools for survival, and to share knowledge across species was remarkable. This simple tent had become a laboratory for discovery, and both teacher and student were learning from one another. By late afternoon, Elias reflected on what he had seen. Seelan had not only adapted to warmth, she had begun to internalize human problem-solving methods. She understood cause and effect, optimization, and experimentation. Her species' intelligence, previously hidden by environmental constraints, was now being expressed in new ways. Elias felt a sense of humility. Humans often underestimated themselves, thinking of other species as inherently superior or incapable. Yet here, the combination of human creativity and compassion had unlocked potential that might have remained dormant for centuries. He observed her closely as she explored further. She touched the panels, adjusted controls, and experimented with energy distribution patterns. Elias noted how her cognitive processes seemed to synchronize with the environmental changes she controlled. It was as if the warmth and stability he provided had unlocked latent abilities. The realization was profound. The human way, problem-solving through observation, experimentation, and adaptability, was not only effective for their own survival, but could elevate other species. The small tent, a simple act of care, had become a transformative environment for learning and discovery. Seelan paused and made a series of gestures toward him. Elias interpreted them as a question: how do humans manage these environments elsewhere? He smiled softly, realizing that she wanted to understand the principles beyond this tent. He demonstrated how humans design shelters, manage energy, and create controlled microenvironments. Her eyes widened with comprehension. She moved through the devices, experimenting with new adjustments that he had not shown her. Elias marveled at the speed of her understanding. The combination of warmth, tools, and freedom to explore had allowed her mind to operate at a level that surpassed even his expectations. As evening approached, Elias allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He watched Seelan work independently, moving with confidence and purpose. Her curiosity was insatiable, her intelligence remarkable, and her adaptability astonishing. He realized that the true power of humanity lay not in brute strength, weapons, or dominance, but in creativity, compassion, and the ability to share knowledge. By inviting her into his tent and providing warmth, he had opened a door to understanding that spanned species. It was a reminder that small acts of kindness could have consequences far greater than anyone could anticipate. The night deepened, but the tent remained a hub of activity. Seelan continued her experiments, adjusting heat, airflow, and energy patterns. Elias documented every detail, noting the ways her cognitive abilities responded to environmental changes. He felt a growing sense of responsibility. If her species could adopt even a fraction of what she was learning, it could transform their approach to survival, exploration, and technology. The encounter had begun as a simple act of rescue, but it had become a bridge between species, a lesson in cooperation, and a glimpse of what humanity could achieve when ingenuity and empathy worked together. Elias also began to understand the importance of patience. Humans often rush to results, relying on tools and systems without fully observing their effects. But Seelan demonstrated a different approach: deliberate, careful, and analytical. She taught him that intelligence was not just about speed, but about depth, observation, and adaptation. By providing warmth, stability, and freedom to explore, he had allowed her to thrive in ways that neither of them could have predicted. The realization was humbling. Humanity's greatest strength might not be strength at all. It might be the quiet power of observation, creativity, and shared knowledge. As he prepared for sleep, Elias watched her settle into a comfortable position, her breathing steady, her body relaxed. The warmth of the tent had done more than preserve life. It had activated intellect, curiosity, and understanding. Seelin had learned not only to survive, but to explore, experiment, and optimize. Her species' latent abilities were now being expressed in ways that could have profound consequences. Elias felt a deep sense of purpose. The act of providing warmth, care, and freedom to learn had become a catalyst for something extraordinary. Outside, the ice moon stretched endlessly, a frozen expanse of silence. But inside, a bubble of life, intelligence, and curiosity persisted. Elias reflected on the journey so far. The simple decision to invite a freezing alien into his tent had transformed the encounter into a profound exchange of knowledge and insight. He had acted instinctively, choosing to help, but the outcome had far exceeded survival. It had become a lesson in humanity, a demonstration of the power of creativity and empathy, and a bridge between worlds. Seelin's eyes met his one last time before sleep claimed her. There was a quiet understanding between them, an unspoken recognition of the shared experience and the possibilities it represented. Elias smiled softly. Humanity's approach, observation, experimentation, and compassion, had proven its value not only to their own species but to others. And in that small tent on a distant ice moon, the potential for a new understanding of life, survival, and cooperation had been unlocked. He closed his eyes, thinking of the future. The encounter was far from over. Seelin would learn more, adapt more, and perhaps share her discoveries with her species. Humans, often underestimated, had shown that ingenuity, patience, and care could resonate across worlds. Elias felt a quiet pride, tempered with humility. He had acted with instinct, but the result had become something far greater. A bridge of understanding, a spark of innovation, and proof that the human way, curious, adaptive, and compassionate, could influence the universe in ways few could imagine. And in that small tent on a frozen moon far from Earth, Elias realized the true power of humanity. It was not weapons, not dominance, not speed. It was the courage to act, the creativity to solve problems, and the empathy to share knowledge, even with someone entirely different. The simple act of providing warmth had created a world of possibilities, and the future of interstellar understanding had just begun.